Hello, my name is Dustin and I'll be teaching you about Dr. Josef Mengele, aka the Angel of Death. The more we do to you, the less you seem to believe we are doing it. This is a quote by Josef Mengele.
My topic is on Mengele, Angel of Death.
The reason I picked this topic was because it piques my interest because Dr. Josef Mengele performed so many experiments on people and I was curious on why he was doing this.
When the drug is brought to market, rigorous testing for safety, quality, and effectiveness is the normal.
Unfortunately, to the tragic end of many, Dr. Josef Mengele performed horrifying tests on humans which cost their lives. What he did was a direct violation to his Hippocratic oath, a vow he took to become a doctor. 7 tiny people, dwarves, arrived at Auschwitz and became part of one of the most famous experiments in recorded history.
Dr. Josef Mengele was notorious for his medical experiments with experimental drugs.
And his relation to the Holocaust was he was the one that created the gases and stuff that went into the death chambers. He studied lots of medicines, and he would often use experimental drugs and medicines to Jewish people at the camps. If the drugs worked, he would use them to help treat injured German soldiers. He also had a really big interest in genetic mutations such as twins, dwarves, giants, and hermaphrodites. I did not want to put a picture of a hermaphrodite on here because it was probably weird and maybe make some of you puke. And I couldn't find a giant because it's not really recorded as a giant person, and the only things I could find were actually pretty cartoony, and I wanted a little more realistic thing. This is the story of the Ovitz family. Oh, and on the left of your screen, that is actually dwarves, but that is actually also the Ovitz family, and to the right is some twins from his experiments. As powerful beams of light revealed the new arrivals at Auschwitz, the SS guards could scarcely believe their eyes. One by one, 7 tiny people were lifted off the train. 5 were women, each no taller than the girl of 5, yet wearing makeup and elegant dresses. They looked like painted dolls. Huddled together in a circle, the 7 dwarves made no attempt to join the teeming mass of passengers being herded up the ramp by soldiers with Alsatians straining at the leash. Instead, one of the male dwarfs started handing out autograph cards to the guards who surrounded them. After all, it couldn't hurt for them to know that the Lilliput troupe was famed internationally for its variety shows. Like most of the Hungarian Jews on the train, which had taken 3 days to arrive at Auschwitz, the dwarves had no idea they had just been deposited in the Nazis' most notorious extermination camp. An SS officer strode over and established that they were all siblings from the Ovitz family. Immediately, the order went out. Wake the doctor. It was nearly midnight on Friday, May 19th, 1944, and Dr. Josef was asleep in his quarters. All the troopers on duty, however, were well aware of his passion for collecting human freaks, including hermaphrodites and giants. A lone dwarf would not have been sufficient reason to serve asleep, but a family was certainly a good place to start. They were certainly right about Joseph. When told about the camp's latest accusation, the good-looking 34-year-old doctor sprang out of bed. Meanwhile, the dwarves watched the rest of the passengers, including their aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends, march towards a building with 2 chimneys that continuously poured out smoke and flames. What was this place, a bakery? Perla Ovitz, at 23, the youngest dwarf, questioned a Jew in a striped jacket who had helped unload the train. "This is no bakery, this is Auschwitz, and soon you'll end up in the ovens too," he told her. Suddenly, as Perla recounted many decades later, each flame looked like a human being flying up and dissolving in the air. We went numb. They then started thinking about the unknown man we were waiting for. If this was a graveyard, then what was a doctor doing here? Had he been asked, Mengele would have said he was conducting important genetic research that might one day lead to a professorship. To that end, he felt no compunction about torturing, maiming, and often killing his unlimited supply of human specimens. His enthusiasm, ambition, and cruelty set him apart even from the other death camp doctors. One of his first jobs had been to deal with a typhus epidemic in the female camp, a problem he solved by sending an entire barrack of 498 women to the gas chambers. It was also his idea to kill families of gypsies for the sake of their eyeballs, which were extracted for research. The Ovitz family, though, a doctor represented hope. As soon as Joseph arrived, they crowded around him, answering his questions eagerly in chorus. A statement mounted as they recounted their family history. Their father, Rabbi Shimshon Eziak, a dwarf, had been married twice to Talmud women who gave birth to 7 dwarfs and 3 conventionally sized siblings. I now have worked for 20 years, he exclaimed joyfully. Joseph whispered orders to the officer in charge. Remarkably, not only were the 7 dwarves, their 2 normal-sized sister-in-law, and 2 of their children saved from the gas chamber that night, but so were the families of their handyman and neighbor who insisted they were close relatives. In total, 22 people. Only 3 hours had passed since the arrival of their train, and most of the passengers, 3,100 out of 3,500, were already dead. The dwarves were lifted onto a truck and driven away. Theirs was to become one of the most extraordinary survival stories of World War II, but it would be many years before it was told, after extensive research and interviews with Perla, Ovitz, and other camp survivors. Unusually, the heads of the Lilliput troupe were not shaven, and they were allowed to keep their own clothes. Simon Slomowitz, the handyman, lifted them onto their wooden bunks and performed all the tasks they couldn't manage. Like all the other prisoners, they lived in a barrack and ate the same watery soup. But it was clear that they had been set apart. Instead of having to use latrines, they were given the potties of dead babies. There was also an aluminum bowl in which they had to wash every day, as Joseph was obsessed with hygiene. Perhaps they thought he wanted them to put on a show. After all, they'd sung and performed sketches since the early 1930s and had even appeared before King Carl II in Bucharest. Only the increasingly punitive Nazi laws against Jews had put a stop to the Lilliput's career. Then the day had come when they were ordered to leave their home in the village of Rosaville. Anticipating hard times ahead, they had hidden all their valuables in a hole dug under their parked car before packing their suitcases with stage costumes and filling their pockets with makeup. On the day they were summoned to Joseph's lab, the women carefully made up their faces and put on their best dresses. To the emaciated inmates who saw them led to a truck, they must have seemed like a bizarre hallucination. The lab looked like any other ordinary clinic with staff in white coats. All they seemed to want at first was to take blood samples, which seemed a small price to pay for their rent. But the bloodletting had repeated week after week along with dozens of x-rays. The amount of blood they took was enormous, and being feeble from hunger, we often fainted, recalled Pearl. That didn't stop Joseph. He had us lie down, and when we came to our senses, they resumed siphoning our blood. They punctured us carelessly, and blood spurted. We often felt nauseous and vomited a lot. When we returned to the barrack, we would slump down on wooden bunks, but before we had time to recover, we would be summoned for a new cycle. Joseph didn't know what he was looking for. Far from recording any effort to break the genetic code for dwarfism, the paperwork reveals only a routine test for kidney problems, liver functions, and typhus. Psychiatrists bombarded the dwarves about questions to test their intelligence. Doctors repeatedly tested them for syphilis and boiling water, quickly followed by freezing water was poured into their ears. According to Perla, this water torture was excruciating, painful, and nearly drove them crazy. Also alarming was the fact that doctors pulled out healthy teeth and plucked hairs from their eyelashes. Dora Ovitz, the full-sized wife of the eldest dwarf, Avram, was cross-examined by Joseph about her sex life. As he bombarded her with increasingly lewd questions, he was actually salivating. Above all, the Lilliputs dreaded suffering the same fate as two male dwarfs, a hunchback and a son, who arrived in the camp 3 months after them. Having decided to send their skeletons to the museum in Berlin, Josef had ordered his staff to boil the bodies over fire until the flesh separated from their bones. So pleased was he with the result that he had another dwarf killed for a skeleton. This time, the unfortunate man was dropped in a bath of acid. We reconciled ourselves to the thought that we were going to walk out of this camp, said Perla, but the notion that our skeletons would be exhibited in Berlin was ghastly beyond words. That they survived was down to the whim of the demon doctor. When the time came for everyone in their part of the concentration camp to be gassed, he saved them a second time by moving them to a different section. The Lilliputs were careful to present a cheerful face to Joseph. They always addressed him as Your Excellency, and once sang him one of his favorite songs, Come Make Me Happy. He was unfailingly polite to the 7 captives, often praising them for their appearance. How beautiful you look today, he would say to Frida, the prettiest of the dwarfs. Flirtatiously, she replied, I know that here Humsterfurum was coming, so I took great care to make myself look up to his honor. If Frida ever skimped out on her beauty routine, he'd ask, Are you in a bad mood today? Why didn't you apply your beautiful red lipstick? Mengele also brought sweets and toys belonging to children he killed. For tall sister Lee's 18-month-old son Shimshan, malnourished and traumatized, the boy had never cried out or uttered a word. One day, however, he toddled to Joseph, saying, Daddy, the doctor smiled. No, I'm not your father, Uncle Mengele. As for Pearl, she was painfully aware of what she called the devil's charm. Dr. Mengele was like a movie star, only more good-looking, she said. Anyone could easily fall in love with him, but no one who saw him could ever imagine that beyond his beautiful face was a beast was hiding. But we all knew that he was ruthless and capable of very worst forms of sadistic behavior. That when he was angry, he became hysterical and shake with rage, and if he were in a bad mood, the moment he stepped into our barracks, he'd immediately calm down. When he was in a good mood, people would say he probably visited little ones. At twilight one day, Joseph dropped in to visit the dwarfs with a small parcel tucked on his arm. He announced that the next day he would be taken home on a special journey to a beautiful place. Noticing their faces had gone desperately green, they would need to look their best, he continued, because they would be returning on stage in front of some very important people. He left, leaving the parcel behind. The 5 women unwrapped it, and to their delight, discovered a powder combat rogue bright red lipstick with matching nail varnish, a bottle of cologne, and vivid turquoise and green eyeshadows. On Friday, at dawn on Friday, September 1, the women helped each other dress and apply their heavy theatrical layer of makeup. Their glamour restored, they felt jubilant as they were lifted onto a track that had come to fetch them. They were taken straight to a large new building in the SS residential camp. Deposited on the lawn, they were soon tucking into a hearty meal served on fine china plates with silver cutlery. Then the true-up was led onto a stage inside. The auditorium was packed with high-ranking SS officers, and Joseph was standing on the front of the stage. As they looked at him for a cue, he suddenly turned and snapped at them, undressed. Aghast, with trembling hands, they fumbled with their bottoms. Once every stitch of their finery had been removed, they stooped as they were trying to hide their breasts and genitals. Sure enough, barked Joseph. He was going public with his work in genetics with a lecture entitled Examples of the Works in Anthropology and Heredity Biology in Concentration Camp. To illustrate his points, he poked the trembling dwarfs with a billiard cue indicating the site of each of their internal organs. His purpose was to show that the Jewish race had degenerated into a people of dwarves and cripples, but as he had no concrete findings, he was relying on the naked lilliputs to give his speech some impact. When he finished, the audience rose to applaud, and a swarm of SS officers climbed on stage to prod at the naked trio. Afterwards, the dwarves were too devastated to accept refreshments. They arrived at their barrack in total silence, only to be greeted by their fellow prisoners as if they had just returned from the dead. Joseph continued to practice his research specimens. Not long afterwards, he saved Avram and Mickey Ovitz from the gas chambers after another Auschwitz doctor, jealous of his rival's success, selected them for extermination behind his back. It was little wonder when Joseph took a week's holiday. The dwarves were beside themselves with fear. On his return, Frida asked him with all the charm she could muster, "Forgive me for asking, Your Excellency, but when will all this be over so we can go home?" Joseph frowned. "What do you mean, Lillip? I can't go home myself. I'm not working here for pleasure, but under orders. You've got nothing to complain about." The end, when it came, was swift. As the word spread in January 1945 that the Russian army was pushing, Joseph gathered up his medical reports and fled. 7 months later, the Ovitz family finally made it home, where they found their gold and jewelry still buried under their cars. But the village of Rosevelia had irrevocably changed. Only 50 of its 650 Jews had returned. In 1949, the family immigrated to Israel, where they spent several years touring their stage show until ill health forced them to return. By the time Perla told her incredible story of the 7 dwarfs of Auschwitz, the rest of their family had died. Mengele, who had escaped justice by fleeing to South America, drowned in 1979. Had he been caught, Perla said she doubted he would have been apologized for what he did to her family. But if the judges had asked me if he should be hanged, I'd have told them to let him go. I was saved by the grace of the devil. God will give Joseph his due. Perla died peacefully, aged 80, on September 9, 2001.
The total amount of twins Dr. Joseph experimented on,
only 200 of the 3,000 twins survived. So in conclusion, Joseph did some very horrible things to people who didn't deserve it. The experiments that Joseph did, though, did lead to some medical advances in the modern world today. Like they had used a low-pressure chamber to test what altitude a plane could fly at, and they also did this to find a good way to cure hypothermia. Mengele's horrible experiments led to medical advances, although the methods he had used were not right. And this has been my presentation.